Hello and welcome to Revenge Blaze, where we bring you the most gripping and satisfying tales of standing up for the truth and claiming the justice you deserve. We are so glad to have you here. Please do not leave the channel early because today's story is packed with intensity and a massive twist that you absolutely do not want to miss. Without further delay, here is today's story, titled, My Brother Mocked My Single Life, so I brought my secret husband and 2 kids to his party. I'm Kiernan, 34 years old, and right now I'm standing in the center of a glass-walled mansion in Aspen, Colorado, watching my own family try to bury my dignity under a mountain of expensive champagne and bitter insults. Today was supposed to be my nephew's birthday party, a celebration of life, but my brother has decided to turn it into a public destruction of my reputation. The room is filled with the elite of Aspen people I've spent my career outworking, yet here in this house, I'm nothing more than a punchline. My brother, standing near the grand fireplace with a smirk that cost more than his car, raised his glass and silenced the room. He didn't talk about his son's milestones. Instead, he looked directly at me and laughed. Still single, Kiernan. How pathetic. You've got the corner office in New York, but you can't even find a man to hold your hand in public. The laughter that followed was like ice water down my spine. Then my mother added the final blow, her voice dripping with a fake sugary pity that cut deeper than any blade. Who would even marry her, Garrett? Look at you and your wife. You're already expecting baby number 3 while your sister is just collecting dust. I stayed silent, my face a mask of calm, even as I felt the entire room staring at me with that suffocating mix of amusement and judgment. They think they've won. They think I'm the lonely workaholic daughter who failed at the only thing they value. They have no idea that the silent storm is about to break. Because in just a few moments, the heavy mahogany doors are going to swing open, and a man they've only dreamed of knowing is going to walk in with 2 children by his side. When he speaks, when he claims me as his own, the arrogant smiles on my brother and mother's faces are going to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Before I reveal how this pathetic single woman left the most powerful people in Aspen frozen in absolute shock, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been the person everyone underestimated, only to prove them all wrong in the most spectacular way possible? If you've ever had to endure a family that chooses judgment over love, or if you believe that success is the best revenge, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel right now. Your support allows us to keep sharing these stories of justice and hidden truths. Stay with me because you won't want to miss the look on my brother's face when he realizes just how wrong he was. Long before I stepped into the biting cold of Aspen, my world was defined by the relentless electric pulse of Manhattan. As a senior litigation partner at a top-tier law firm, my life was a high-stakes chess game played in mahogany boardrooms and marble courthouses. I was the woman CEOs called when they were in trouble, the one who could silence a room of aggressive hedge fund managers with a single, well-placed sentence. My apartment in Tribeca was a sanctuary of glass and steel, featuring a panoramic view of the Hudson River that reminded me every morning of how far I had climbed. In New York, I was a titan. In the eyes of my peers, I was a woman who had successfully conquered the ultimate concrete jungle, building a legacy of intellectual brilliance and financial independence that most people only dreamed of achieving. Yet every time I looked at my phone and saw a notification from my family, that skyscraper-high confidence would flicker. To my mother, Martha, and my brother, Garrett, my career wasn't a source of pride. It was a convenient excuse for why I was still alone. They viewed my professional triumphs as a consolation prize for my failure to secure a husband and produce heirs. I had learned early on that in their narrow traditional world, a woman's value was strictly measured by the size of her diamond ring and the number of strollers in her garage. This fundamental disconnect was the primary reason I had kept the most important part of my life a complete secret for over a year. I remembered the evening I met Beckett Montgomery. It wasn't at a cliché bar or through a desperate dating app. We had met during a complex medical malpractice deposition where he was the expert witness. I was struck not just by his surgical precision and towering intellect, but by the quiet, grounded kindness in his eyes, a kindness that had been sharpened by the grief of losing his first wife 3 years prior. Our relationship had grown in the quiet spaces of New York, away from the prying eyes of social media and toxic relatives. We shared Sunday brunches in West Village and quiet evenings helping his children Leo and Clara with their science projects. Beckett was the first man who didn't feel threatened by my ambition. Instead, he admired it. We had slipped away to a private courthouse ceremony months ago, choosing a union built on soul-deep connection rather than a public spectacle. I kept it quiet because I knew my family would instantly try to commodify my happiness, or worse, treat Beckett's children like intruders in their perfect lineage. The morning of the Aspen trip, I stood in my dressing room, meticulously selecting an outfit that served as a suit of armor. I chose a charcoal cashmere turtleneck and tailored trousers understated expensive and professional. I wasn't there to compete with Elowyn, my brother's wife, who I knew would be draped in enough logos to resemble a walking billboard for a luxury mall. My focus was on the gift I had prepared for my nephew. I had spent weeks sourcing a rare vintage mechanical clockwork set from an estate in Europe. It was an educational masterpiece worth $12,000 intended to spark the boy's curiosity in engineering. I had it wrapped in handmade Japanese paper, securing the ribbon with a sense of hopeful nervousness. Even at 34, part of me still craved a crumb of validation from a mother who only had eyes for her son. The flight to Colorado was spent reviewing briefs, but my mind kept drifting to Beckett and the kids who were supposed to join me later as a surprise. I had rehearsed my entrance a dozen times, telling myself to stay calm and be the professional I was trained to be. When I finally arrived at the sprawling timber and stone estate my brother called a vacation home, a place I knew was heavily mortgaged, the tension was immediate. Garrett met me at the door not with a hug, but with a scrutinizing gaze at my luggage. He let out a short, mocking huff, noting that I looked like I was heading to a funeral rather than a birthday party. I walked into the grand hall where the scent of pine needles and expensive catering filled the air. My mother, Martha, was busy directing the decorators with the intensity of a four-star general. When she saw me, her first instinct wasn't to ask about my life or my grueling 6-month trial that had just concluded. She simply adjusted my collar with a sigh of disapproval. "You look tired, Kiernan. That's what happens when you spend your best years staring at legal documents instead of a husband. You should take notes from Eloan. She's glowing, and Garrett says they have another blessing on the way." I forced a smile, the kind I used when a judge made a ruling I hated, and handed her the meticulously wrapped gift for my nephew. "This is for the birthday boy," I said softly. Martha took the package, barely glancing at the exquisite wrapping. She set it on the very edge of a table already overflowing with bright plastic-wrapped boxes that screamed of loud toys. "Oh, more books. Or something educational. I assume you always were a bit too serious for your own good, Kiernan." Garrett got him a miniature electric ATV. Now that's a real gift. A boy needs to have fun, not study on his birthday. She dismissed my gesture before I could even explain the significance of the clockwork set. It was a familiar sting, the realization that in this house my thoughtfulness was boring and my success was an eyesore. I stood there, a stranger in my own family, watching Garrett boast to a group of local businessmen about his latest investments, while I gripped my glass, waiting for the storm I knew was coming. The grand ballroom of the Aspen estate felt less like a home and more like a stage set designed for a production of Wealthy and Perfect. Soft jazz drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of overpriced candles and the clinking of delicate crystal. I moved through the crowd like an uninvited ghost, watching Garrett play the part of the local magnate with a desperation that was painful to witness. He was currently cornering a bank executive near the floor-to-ceiling windows, gesturing wildly toward the snow-covered slopes. His suit was a shade too tight, his laughter a pitch too loud, and his forehead was slick with sweat that no amount of air conditioning could cool. To the casual observer, he was a success story in a designer silk tie, but to a lawyer who spent her days dissecting fraudulent balance sheets, Garrett looked like a man standing on a very thin sheet of ice in the middle of a July heat wave. I knew the truth behind the curtain because I had seen the frantic emails he thought he'd hidden from the family. Garrett's luxury car dealership was bleeding cash, and his investments in cryptocurrency had evaporated faster than a puddle in the Sahara. This entire Aspen weekend with its hired staff and premium catering was a frantic attempt to project an image of stability to the very people he hoped would bail him out. It was a classic American tragedy wrapped in gold foil, a man drowning in debt while trying to convince his neighbors that he'd just bought a yacht. As I reached the bar to refill my sparkling water, Alawan appeared beside me, her presence announced by a cloud of perfume that cost more than a small car. She was wearing a dress so white and pristine that it seemed to mock the very idea of a child's birthday party. She rested a hand on her stomach with a gesture so practiced it belonged in a silent film. "Kiernan, darling, you look so efficient." She cooed, her eyes scanning my tailored trousers with a mixture of pity and smugness. "I was just telling the girls that it must be so quiet in your New York office. No little feet running around, no messy handprints on the windows. It sounds so peaceful in a sterile, lonely kind of way." I took a slow sip of my water, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her shift on her designer heels. "Peace is a luxury I value, Elowen, though I imagine your windows are quite clean, considering you have a full-time staff to wipe away those handprints you mentioned so fondly." Her smile didn't waver, but her grip on her mocktail tightened. Elowen's entire personality was built on the foundation of being the perfect mother, a role she used as a weapon against anyone who chose a different path. "Well, with baby number 3 arriving soon, we're going to need an even bigger team. Garrett is already talking about adding a new wing to our suburban house. He says a man with our lineage needs room for a legacy, not just a career." She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's so worried about you, you know. He told me the other night that it breaks his heart to think of you spending your Christmases with a cat and a stack of legal briefs. He even offered to let you be the godmother for the new baby just so you could feel what it's like to have someone truly belong to you." The sheer audacity of her charity made me want to laugh out loud. Garrett was currently 3 months behind on his commercial lease, yet here was his wife planning an architectural expansion for a child they could barely afford to clothe. I wandered toward the buffet table where the birthday boy was indeed having a meltdown of epic proportions. My mother was hovering over him, cooing and offering him more sugar, while David Garrett's father-in-law watched with a look of profound boredom. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Here was a family that claimed to value tradition, yet they were raising a child who had never heard the word no and was surrounded by adults who had never heard the word budget. Garrett finally broke away from the banker, looking frustrated and exhausted. He caught my eye and marched over, his face reddening as he glanced at my untouched glass of water. "For God's sake, Kiernan, try to look like you're having fun. You're depressing the guests. People are asking why my sister looks like she's at a deposition instead of a party." "Maybe because I'm the only one here who isn't pretending that the bank isn't sending you final notices, Garrett." I said, my voice low and steady. He froze, his eyes darting around to see if anyone had heard. For a split second, the mask slipped. But then the arrogance returned, thicker and more defensive than before. "You think you're so smart because you play with big numbers in the city. Those are just papers. This is real life. This house, this party, this family, it's something you'll never understand because you're too selfish to build anything that doesn't have your name on a business card." He stepped closer, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and desperation. "Elowen is giving this family a third child. She's contributing to our future. What are you doing? You're just an observer, Kiernan. A guest in a life you're not brave enough to live. I looked at him and felt a wave of genuine pity. He was so caught up in the performance that he didn't realize the audience had already started leaving. He didn't know that while he was mocking my empty life, I was thinking of the quiet, solid warmth of my home with Beckett. I thought of Leo's laughter and Clara's proud face when she finished a difficult book. Garrett didn't know that my life was actually overflowing with the very things he was pretending to have. I simply nodded, turned my back on him, and walked toward the balcony. I needed the cold air of the mountains to wash away the cloying smell of his lies. The party was reaching its peak. The music was getting louder and the toasts were about to begin. I knew exactly what was coming. More praise for Garrett, more pity for me, and a whole lot of expensive champagne to wash down the bitter taste of their hypocrisy. The dinner was served in the formal dining room, a space dominated by a massive oak table that looked like it had been salvaged from an ancient castle. Crystal chandeliers cast a flickering light over the guests, reflecting off the silver cutlery with an intensity that made my head ache. I sat between a distant cousin and a local real estate developer. At the head of the table, Garrett was in his element, pouring wine and regaling the group with stories of his supposed corporate conquests. Mother sat to his right, her posture as rigid as the fine we were eating from her eyes, constantly scanning the table like a predator looking for a weakness. The atmosphere shifted when the main course was cleared and the expensive dessert wine began to flow. Garrett tapped his knife against his glass to command attention. He looked around the room, his face flushed with unearned pride, and finally let his gaze settle on me. A silence fell over the table. "You know," he began, his voice booming through the hall. "We've spent a lot of time tonight talking about the future. Elowen and I are building something that will last for generations. But I look at my dear sister Kiernan, and it makes me think about the past, specifically things that have long since passed their expiration date." A few people chuckled nervously. He leaned back, spreading his arms wide. "Kiernan has all this New York prestige. But in this family we have a saying, wealth, without a legacy, is just a pile of cold ash." Mother and I were talking earlier about some of the vintage furniture in this house. We decided that some pieces, no matter how expensive they were, when they were new, eventually just become obsolete. They take up space, but they don't serve a purpose anymore. Mother didn't flinch. She took a delicate sip of her wine and nodded in agreement. "It's a harsh truth, Garrett, but a necessary one. A woman who spends her best years arguing in courtrooms instead of nurturing a home is like a beautiful clock that has lost its internal gears. It looks impressive on the shelf, but it can no longer tell the time. Kiernan is quite frankly an antique in a modern world. She's an obsolete item that chose a corner office over the heartbeat of a family." I felt the blood drain from my face, not because I believed them, but because of the sheer cruelty of saying such things in front of 30 people. The humiliation was thick enough to taste. Garrett let out a loud, braying laugh. "Exactly, Mother. She's like one of those high-end flip phones from 10 years ago. Sure, it was top of the line back then, but now, you just put it in a drawer and forget about it. No one wants to buy an antique that can't even do the basic functions it was designed for." Elowen chimed in with a tittering laugh, resting her hand on her belly. "Oh, Garrett, don't be so mean. I'm sure some collector somewhere would appreciate Kiernan's unique dedication to her paperwork. It's just a shame that she'll never know the joy of seeing herself reflected in a child's eyes. That's a luxury no amount of billable hours can purchase." I sat there frozen in my chair, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Every instinct I had as a litigator urged me to stand up and destroy them. I could have brought up Garrett's debt in 5 seconds. I could have mentioned the 3 separate times Mother had called me begging for loans to cover his mistakes. But as I looked at their smug, self-satisfied faces, I realized that words wouldn't be enough. They didn't deserve my anger. They deserved my silence. To react would be to grant them the power they so desperately craved. So I did the one thing they didn't expect. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply waited for the laughter to die down. Then I looked Garrett directly in the eye and gave him a small, pitying smile. I slowly pushed my chair back, the wooden legs echoing against the stone floor like a gunshot. Without saying a word to the table at large, I leaned over and whispered to the real estate developer. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. The beef was excellent, but the company has turned a bit sour. I stood up with a grace that felt like it belonged to a different person. I didn't look at Mother, whose expression had shifted from triumph to confusion. I walked out of the dining room, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against the floorboards. I made my way through the grand hall and pushed open the heavy glass doors that led to the expansive stone balcony. The transition from the stifling dining room to the sharp sub-zero air of Aspen was instantaneous. I inhaled a deep breath of the mountain wind, letting the cold sear my lungs and clear the lingering scent of Eloan's perfume. I leaned my elbows on the frosted railing, my breath blooming in white clouds before me. For the first time since I had arrived, I felt like I could actually think. The insults still burned, but they felt distant now. I reached into the small clutch bag I was carrying and pulled out my phone. I pulled up the last photo Beckett had sent me that afternoon, a picture of Leo and Clara in the back seat of his SUV, surrounded by winter gear, their faces beaming with excitement. I stared at the image. My obsolete life was waiting for me just a few miles down the road. My antique heart was currently being held in the hands of 3 people who loved me for exactly who I was. I leaned my head against the cold railing, a small, genuine laugh escaping my lips. The air was getting colder, and for the first time in years, I felt completely, utterly free. The silence of the mountain night was broken only by the soft crunch of snow coming from the garden path below the balcony. I watched as 2 small figures emerged from the shadows of the pines. Behind them, a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette moved with steady, confident grace. My heart suddenly gave a frantic, hopeful leap. "Kiernan, Kiernan, we found you." A high-pitched voice rang out. It was Clara. Leo was right behind her, waving a gloved hand toward the balcony. They looked like 2 bright sparks in a frozen world. "Clara, Leo, what on earth are you doing out here in the snow?" I called out. "The hotel was boring, and Daddy said we couldn't wait another minute to see you." Leo shouted back. "He said you might need a rescue mission." The man in the shadows stepped into the soft glow of the balcony lights. Beckett Montgomery looked exactly like the man I had married, calm, commanding, and infinitely kind. He didn't need a loud voice to command a room. He simply existed with a quiet authority that made Garrett's antics look like a cheap school play. He climbed the stairs with a purposeful stride, the children scrambling up ahead of him. Clara reached me first, throwing her arms around my waist. "I missed you so much. Why are you out here all alone? Is it because the party is too loud? Daddy said some parties are just noise." I knelt down, pulling both of them into a tight embrace. Beckett reached the top of the stairs and stood just a few feet away, watching us with a soft, knowing smile. He reached out and gently brushed a stray hair from my forehead. "You look like you've been through a war, Kiernan," he said softly, his voice a deep, comforting rumble. "I saw the cars out front. It looks like quite the event." It was a performance, Beckett. A very long, very cruel performance. I whispered, leaning my forehead against his shoulder for a brief second of sanctuary. "I'm so glad you're here." "Oh, I think I have a pretty good idea," he replied, his jaw tightening slightly. "I checked the guest list Garrett sent out. Half of his important people are actually donors to the hospital board. If they're the ones you've been dealing with all night, you definitely deserve a medal." Leo was busy examining the ornate stone carvings on the balcony railing. "This house is huge, Kiernan, but it feels kind of spooky. Can we go inside now? I'm hungry." I looked at Beckett. Part of me wanted to whisk them away immediately, but another part realized that the rescue mission was about showing my family exactly what they had dismissed. "You guys want to go inside?" I asked, looking at the children's eager faces. "There's plenty of food. but I have to warn you the people inside might be a little bit strange. Worse than the people in my comic books? Leo asked, his eyes widening. Worse? I laughed. But don't worry. You have the best lawyer in New York and the best doctor in Denver to protect you. Beckett took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine, solid and certain. We're with you, Kiernan. Whatever happens in there, we're a team. We stood there for a moment, a small island of warmth in the Aspen night. I looked at Beckett, seeing the man who had rebuilt his life from the ashes of grief and who had invited me to be a part of that new foundation. Are you ready? Beckett asked. I've never been more ready in my life, I said, lifting my chin. Let's go show them what an obsolete life really looks like. As we turned toward the heavy glass doors, Clara grabbed my other hand. The light from the ballroom spilled out onto the balcony, and as I reached for the handle, I felt a sense of calm power settle over me. I was the one bringing the change. The heavy glass doors slid open with a soft hiss, and I stepped back into the warmth of the ballroom, flanked by Beckett and the children. We moved as a single unit toward the center of the lounge, where Garrett was currently holding court near a display of vintage whiskeys. He was mid-sentence when his eyes snagged on us. The words died in his throat. Mother, who was seated on a velvet sofa nearby, looked up with an expression of pinched annoyance. Her gaze flicked from my face to the two children holding my hands, and then finally to the tall, imposing man at my side. Garrett looked as though he had seen a ghost. Dr. Montgomery. Garrett's voice was barely a whisper. He stumbled forward. Is that really you? What are you doing here in my house? Beckett didn't move. He stood with his hand resting firmly on the small of my back, his presence filling the room with a quiet, undeniable power. I believe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, Garrett. I'm here to celebrate with my wife. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt as though the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Mother rose slowly from the sofa. Wife, she echoed, her voice shaking with disbelief. Kiernan, what on earth is this man talking about? Who are these children? I took a deep breath. Mother Garrett, I'd like you to officially meet Beckett Montgomery. We were married a year ago in New York. And these are our children, Leo and Clara. I believe Garrett is already familiar with Beckett's professional reputation, even if he didn't realize we shared a last name and a life. Garrett looked like he was struggling to breathe. For months he had been bragging to anyone who would listen about his impending meeting with the legendary Dr. Montgomery to save his dealership. To see the man he had been worshipping from afar, holding the hand of the sister he had just called obsolete, was a blow so precise it was almost poetic. Married! Elowen shrieked. That's impossible, Kiernan, you're a workaholic. You don't have time for a family. And Dr. Montgomery, surely you could have done better than a cold, bitter lawyer who spends all her time in a courtroom. Beckett's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped an octave. I would choose my next words very carefully if I were you, Elowen. My wife is a senior partner at one of the most prestigious firms in the country because she is brilliant and resilient. As for her having time for a family, she is the heart of ours. Clara tugged on my hand, looking up at Mother with wide eyes. Are you the mean grandma who makes Kiernan sad? Daddy said we had to come rescue her from the people who don't know how to use their hearts. Mother turned a deep shade of purple. The social standing she had spent her life cultivating was crumbling in real time. Kiernan, she hissed, trying to reclaim some shred of authority. How could you keep this from us? Your own family, to get married in secret. It's disrespectful. I kept it from you for exactly the reason we saw tonight, Mother. I said, my voice projecting clearly. I wanted to protect my peace. You called me an antique and an obsolete model because I didn't fit into your narrow little script. Well, here is my reality. And it's a life you aren't a part of because you chose cruelty over connection. Garrett tried to laugh, but it came out as a pathetic, strangled sound. Wait, Dr. Montgomery. Beckett. Surely we can talk about this. We were just joking around. Beckett looked at Garrett with a mixture of pity and disgust. I've read your emails, Garrett, and I've seen the credit reports my firm's lawyers ran on your dealership. Your business is a sinking ship built on predatory loans and misrepresented assets. I wouldn't trust you to provide a bicycle for the hospital. And I don't break bread with men who insult my wife to make themselves feel taller. The room went cold. The local businessmen suddenly began to step back, literally distancing themselves from Garrett. We're leaving. Beckett said, his tone final. He turned to me, his eyes softening instantly. Are you ready to go home, Kiernan? The kids are tired. I looked at the room one last time, at Mother's stunned silence and Garrett's shattered pride. Yes, I said. Let's go home. We walked toward the exit, the guests parting like the Red Sea. No one said a word. I stepped out into the crisp, honest snow of the Aspen night and felt the last lingering threads of my past finally snap. I stopped just a few feet from the grand entrance. I turned back one last time, not out of longing or regret, but because a professional litigator never leaves a case with loose ends. Garrett was standing in the center of the room, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. Mother was clutching his arm, her mind clearly racing to find a way to spin this disaster into a social victory. Before I walk out of this house and out of your lives for good, I began, my voice carrying with cold, crystalline clarity. I think there's one final piece of the obsolete puzzle. Garrett, you spent the entire dinner mocking my life and my choices. You called me a failure because I didn't have a family to show off like a trophy. You stood there with a glass of Bordeaux that cost more than your car's monthly insurance, acting as the king of Aspen. Garrett swallowed hard. Kiernan, look, I already said we were just joking. Oh, the scene was made long ago, Garrett, I countered. But let's talk about honesty. Since Mother is so proud of your success, maybe she should know about the 36 frantic text messages you've sent me over the last 4 months. Maybe she'd like to know about the $250,000 you begged me for last Tuesday to stop the bank from seizing your showroom inventory. The collective gasp from the room was audible. Mother's grip on Garrett's arm tightened. Garrett, what is she talking about? You told me the business was expanding. I let out a short, humorless laugh. He didn't help me with my taxes, Mother. He asked me to commit fraud to hide his losses from your family trust. He mocked my life in public while crawling to me on his knees in private, hoping I'd be loyal enough to keep his failures a secret. Garrett's face turned a violent shade of purple. His social currency had just hit zero. You promised you wouldn't say anything, he hissed. Family is supposed to protect each other. Family is supposed to respect each other, Garrett, I said. And Mother, to you, family is just a script where you get to cast the roles based on who flatters your ego the most. You both treated me like an outsider because I refused to play the part of the miserable spinster you needed me to be. Mother stepped forward, her eyes brimming with tears. Kiernan, please. We only wanted the best for you. We were just worried. No, Mother. You were embarrassed. I corrected her firmly. You were embarrassed that I didn't give you a wedding to brag about. You never asked if I was happy. You only asked when I would be normal. Well, this is my normal. My husband respects my mind, and my children are being raised to value truth over appearances. I looked at Garrett one last time. Don't bother calling my office again, Garrett. I've already instructed my firm's security to flag your number. And don't bother asking for that loan. I'd rather donate that $250,000 to a charity for abandoned pets than spend a single cent to keep your facade from crumbling. Beckett took my hand and began to lead me toward the door. Kiernan, wait, Mother cried out. What are we supposed to tell everyone? I paused at the threshold, the cold Aspen air already rushing in to meet me. I looked back over my shoulder, a small, genuine smile playing on my lips. Tell them whatever you want, Mother. You've always been so good at making up stories. but tell them from a distance because this is the last time any of you will ever see me. The doors closed behind us with a solid thud that felt like the final period at the end of a long, painful chapter. I had my own family now, one built on the bedrock of truth. 2 months have passed since that freezing night in Aspen, and the silence from my former life has been the most beautiful soundtrack I've ever heard. Following that evening, I did exactly what I promised. I changed my personal phone number and formally resigned from my role as the unofficial emergency bank for the family. In the legal world, we call it a clean break, but in my heart, it felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for 34 years. The consequences for Garrett were as swift as they were inevitable. Without the $250,000 lifeline he tried to extort from me, his house of cards collapsed. His dealership went into involuntary receivership, and just last week, the Aspen estate was seized by the bank. I heard that Garrett and Elowen have moved into a cramped 2-bedroom rental far away from the elite social circles they once desperately craved. Mother now spends her days trying to explain to her bridge club why her golden son is no longer the king of the mountain. They chose a path built on facades and cruelty, and they finally reached the dead end they deserved. Meanwhile, my life has found a rhythm that is solid, honest, and overflowing with genuine joy. I am no longer an observer of other people's happiness. I am the architect of my own. I've realized that being obsolete in the eyes of toxic people is actually a badge of honor. It means you are no longer useful to their manipulation, and that is the ultimate freedom. Looking back, I've learned that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who stands beside you when the room goes quiet. Thank you so much for being a part of my journey today. If this story resonated with your own experiences, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel right now. Your engagement allows us to continue bringing these powerful stories of justice and personal growth to light. We would love to hear your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. Your voice matters to us. I wish you all abundant health, immense luck, and the courage to always choose your own path. Until next time, stay strong and stay true to yourself.